Of Full Scottish. Can't believe it's 4 already. Time flies when you're having fun. We've got a great programme for you today, full of interesting people and good chat. Starting off with the paper review, which this week features Kevin Pringle, who's a former SNP Communications Director, now Sunday Times columnist and working for a media consultancy, and Susan Egglestaff, who's a prize-winning badminton player, 2012 London Olympian and Commonwealth medalist, now sports journalist for the Herald, the Sunday Herald and the National. And later on, Susan is staying with us to discuss Scottish women in sport with Maureen McGonigal, who's the founder and chief executive of that organisation. And we're also talking to some candidates in the Holyrood election. Is that
we
right,
are,
Michelle?
yes. We've got some female list candidates with us today. They're going to be talking about what it's like to be a candidate and what it's like in particular to be a female candidate, which will be interesting.
Indeed, indeed. And we're also looking at Plug, which is a festival being organised by the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland to celebrate new music. For me, the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland is one of the hidden gems of the country. I don't know about you, but I didn't know too much about it until relatively recently.
I'm the same. I've got a friend who works there, and it was only through her that I started going to see some of the performances and productions, and they are outstanding.
Absolutely. I went to see Carousel there. I'm a big fan of musicals, strangely. And Tommy, which was brilliant.
Oh,
but
that would be fab.
When I was at the Sunday Herald, we had a great project which was called the Sunday Herald Band. Where we
A band?
A band, yeah. We do everything at the Sunday Herald.
Were you any good?
I wasn't in the band. I was the manager.
That's a cool job.
I was very good at that. However, the band members, the rule was that they couldn't play an instrument. So they had 6 months to get a set together and learn the instrument and 3 songs and perform at Tea in the Park. Yeah.
What songs did you do?
They did Seven Nation Army, Daydream Believer, and Johnny Be Good, I believe.
And that was a conductor from the Conservatoire?
Andrew Panton, who was he's a musical director at the Conservatoire. He's an absolute genius. He pulled that band together. He made it happen.
Tough job.
And sort of dragged them very screaming into the rehearsal room sometimes, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
He had to be quite heavy sometimes with them, but it was great. Although the stage manager at Tea in the Park said he had less trouble with Beyonce than he did with the Sunday Herald Band, and as their manager, I agree with that. So yeah, we're looking at that.
Look at that, yeah. Obviously, the newspaper review, and if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the Old Firm game and the increase in domestic violence on the day of the Old Firm game. And what happened a few weeks ago was that the police were rounding up serial offenders, if you like, if you want to call them that, and keeping them away from the home to make sure the environment was safer. Despite all of that, there were still 200 calls to the police on the day of the Old Firm game.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a good discussion we had in that. Then
was.
we're going to have a good discussion today, and so I'd like to welcome Susan and Kevin to kick off the paper review today. So, looking first of all, I guess papers are awash with election stuff. Clearly, it's the last Sunday before the election. Nicola Sturgeon is on the cover of Scotland Sunday, the Sunday Herald, Sunday Mail, you name it. So, Susan, did anything strike you about the coverage of the election today?
Well, I mean, I think just really over the last few months, it's been quite boring, I think. I think part of the reason for that is, I think part of the reason for that is it's just such a foregone conclusion. The only real question
Labour's going to win, right?
Yeah. The only real question is how massive is the SNP's victory going to be? And, I think the fact that the Gary Tank Commander interviews with the leaders has been the best bit of TV about the election really says it all. I think the fact that that's kind of been the most interesting thing.
I think they all came out of that really, really well, didn't
Same,
they?
yeah, me too.
You saw a different side to
a more
the
human side.
Yeah.
So, I mean, apart from David Coburn, who came across just as a
dreadful.
nutter, but I think that's kind of goes without saying.
But we were saying earlier how good you thought Kezia was.
Yeah, I mean, I think
She doesn't have a lot.
she
She doesn't have a lot of time for Willie, right?
Yeah. She's just confirmed that. So I think they all came across as much more human, and I think I think that's what people want to see now. People are not all that interested in the kind of. I don't think that interested in policies and the detail. I think people want to see what the leaders are like as people rather than the kind of party politics of it, to be honest.
Yeah. So what did you think, Kevin, about I guess Nicola Sturgeon front page, most of the papers?
Yeah, it's pretty much the Nicola Sturgeon show as the whole election's been, and Susan says the election campaign's been quite boring, and she's right, but in a sense, if you're as far ahead in the polls as the SNP are, then boring's good, because you really just want things to stay the same, as every single poll has shown the position to be all the way through the campaign. There's a poll in the Sunday Times today, shows a small slippage in SNP support, high 40s on the first past the post vote, mid 40s on the list vote, but still showing an overall majority.
Does it say where that support's going?
It's going in a number of different directions. I think the Greens will probably do quite well on the list vote, but we have elections in Scotland now for the Scottish Parliament really to decide who the opposition is going to be, because who the government is going to be is a foregone conclusion. So there's mixed evidence in the polls. On the Sunday Times poll, it shows Labour actually doing pretty well.
A late surge.
That's right, although it comes before, I think, the recent difficulties they've had in terms of the spamming Ken Livingstone and John Mann. On the other hand, the Sunday Post, I've got a lot of experts to crunch the numbers, and they're suggesting that the Tories actually will just shade the second place. So in as much as there's still interest in what the result is going to be, then the jury's still out in terms of who's going to get silver and who's going to get bronze, if you like, in terms of who's going to
Although
get
it is
second and
interesting
third.
that's what it's all framed about who's going to be runner-up, and when I'm talking about it's a Labour surge, it's a surge in a very limited way.
Exactly.
Although there is, I guess, still, and we've talked about this before in this programme, the whole debate about what you should use or what you could use your second vote for, and I think that's difficult because some people are confused. Me, for instance, are confused.
You're confused.
Still, I'm confused
You're
for
confused,
for 3 weeks, and I'm still no clearer about how you work out what you should be doing with your second vote if you want to achieve certain ends.
Depends what you want to achieve, and if you're a strong SNP supporter, then you should vote SNP. If you're inclined towards the Greens, by all means, it depends. If you want an SNP, I think the simple way to look at it, I think, is to look at what happened last time. If you come at it from the point of view, as I do, that I would like the SNP to get an overall majority, then in the 2011 result, then it needed list seats to make up the majority because the first past the post seats weren't enough on their own. So in that sense, you would vote SNP on your list vote as well if it requires list votes to make up the majority. So I think rather than try and game the system in terms of what might happen on Thursday, I would just look back to what happened in 2011.
Yeah.
But if you want a different outcome, then obviously you vote differently.
Yeah.
So just vote for what you believe in, I think, is the best way to look at it.
Yeah, Susan, I'm not going to ask you how you're going to vote because that's up to you. But you find it a confusing decision to take?
Oh, it's so confusing. I mean, I don't understand exactly how, it all works. And I think most people are like that. And I think, it's interesting that the Sunday Herald are suggesting that if people want independence, to use your second vote for the Greens. And I think that's interesting because that must worry the SNP slightly. That it's kind of such a kind of pro-independence papers suggesting or recommending that you vote for the Greens the second vote, because complacency must be an issue. The SNP are so far in front. It is, I would imagine, a danger that people go, well, the SNP don't need my second vote. And the SNP must be worried about that because there's so many people now saying that, John Curtis came out and said that your list vote for the SNP is a wasted vote, and it is.
But even he's changing his tune from week to week.
Changed it last week from opposition before.
It's encouraging that someone as well educated as that isn't quite sure. It makes me feel better.
Me too. I'm not the only person that's confused, which is good to know. Nicola Sturgeon, though, right at the centre of the SNP's election campaign. Is that strange? Would that be a surprise?
I don't think so. I think the fact that she is seeking her own mandate, and she'd said this at the SNP manifesto launch, this is her job application to be First Minister. Yeah. She's never been elected First Minister before, so I think that's always going to be a big factor. But it's also in the context of, it's been a very leader-focused campaign. If you look at the other parties, the Tories have been very much pushing Ruth Davidson. It's been almost like the Ruth Davidson party. Labour pushing Kezia Dugdale because the Labour brand, if you like, is so tarnished that there's a relatively new leader who's quite an effective, committed person in her own right. So I think because it's Nicola seeking her own mandate, in the other parties, the brand is problematic in Scotland, and that's the case for the Lib Dems as well. So they're all pushing their leaders. So it's no great surprise. But you're right in terms of looking at the front pages today, then so many, whether a sort of portrait kind of picture or indeed a caricature on the front page of the Sunday Mail. But it is very much this is the Nicola Sturgeon election.
Nicola show. And I guess the message that she's sending out is, as you say, this is the first time she's actually stood an election as a leader of the SNP, so it is a very personal mandate that she's looking for. Also, I suppose there's some pressure on her to pony up more than a support for independence. The Sunday Mail, I think it is, is talking very much about education, how that's the issue that she wants to be defined by or judged by. And Sunday Mail is saying, be radical, stare down the people who are trying to say that we can't change things. Do you find that a compelling argument in terms of her? I mean, she's clearly a hugely popular politician.
She is, but I think looking at social media this morning, there's some kind of pushback on the likes of the Sunday Herald story today, saying I will lead Scotland to independence, and there's almost a sense that people are saying, you can't be complacent. Don't you can't, can you guarantee that?
Yeah, you can't guarantee anything until people go to the voting booths and you count the votes, and then you know who's won. But pretty much all papers, as you were saying, Susan, it's interesting. Today is the day newspapers would say the party they support, and few of them have done that because most of them say, look, SNP is going to win.
Yeah, and I don't think it matters who any of the papers say they're going to support. The SNP are going to win, whatever anyone says. So, yeah, I mean, the SNP are in a bit of a hide into nothing this election, aren't they? Because, you know, if they don't win by a huge margin, or as huge a margin as people are predicting, then people go, oh, wasn't great for them. Whereas if you look at, you know, a bit more objectively, they're going to win by a huge margin, and that's surely a success. But yeah, they're in a little bit of a hide into nothing. You worried about people getting complacent about their votes.
Yeah. In terms of the other things that are happening that may influence the election, I think there was something in the Observer about the European referendum.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interestingly, it's got a bit of an upsurge in support for Remain in terms of the June referendum. So Remain's ahead of Leave by just 1 point.
Right.
But the most interesting feature of the poll, which goes completely unreported upon by the Observer newspaper, is that it's only the Scottish support for Remain that makes it a UK-wide Remain. So if you look at the English and Welsh figures, they're for Leave, but the very strong Scottish Remain basically makes a difference and tips it over just into Remain. It would be very, very fascinating if that was the actual result of the referendum in June.
Well, England being dragged back.
Exactly, that's right.
Yeah, by
Because
Scotland.
there's been so much debate about, you know, Scotland potentially getting dragged out against its will in terms of the result UK-wide, but it's quite possible, in a very, very narrow as it could be, result that Scotland could make the difference, as you say, drag the rest of the UK in against its will.
Absolutely, that's a constitutional crisis right there in the making when England demands independence.
Well, it could be a kind of push-pull in terms of independence. There could be a kind of, you know, push element from south of the border as well as a pull element in Scotland. So that's maybe part of the mix in terms of looking forward to potentially another referendum within the next number of years.
Well, indeed. Susan, are you particularly engrossed in the European referendum?
No.
No! Surely you're in a step with the rest of the country there.
Yeah. I mean, I'll definitely vote, and I will definitely vote for Britain to stay in, but I mean, it's just pretty painful, isn't it? And I think, you know, it's in some ways there's a lot of similarities with the independence referendum, and that, you know, there's the whole Project Fear, and you know, actually nobody really knows what will happen if Britain leaves the EU. So yeah, I mean, certainly, I mean, I think Britain will stay in. I think the polls are kind of suggesting, but it looks like it's going to be close, doesn't it?
It does look as if it's going to be close, but it is hard to get people's, not attention, but it's hard to make it about anything other than sort of internal Tory party politics and Boris versus David Cameron,
Yeah, exactly.
which is kind of interesting, I suppose. Europe itself is hard. I remember when I was a junior reporter, which, you know, wasn't yesterday clearly, and the local MEP took me over to Strasbourg, I think it was, and I spent 2 or 3 days with him, and it was nice, but kind of dull. And I said to him, right, if you had to say one thing which could made it worthwhile, your whole job worthwhile in your time here, what would that be? And he said, well, I helped to save the custard cream. I have to say it's not that impressive, is it? I'm not, you know, I'm
I
not.
would vote for it.
Well, yeah, I push, I guess, but there are things I would
I
what?
prefer a bourbon biscuit.
See, yeah, it's the whole biscuit test. It's not a lot. But in terms of the other things that might impact on the Scottish election, I suppose the anti-Semitism row in the Labour Party. How do you think that will clearly have an impact on the mayoral campaign in London?
Yeah, I think it might spill over into the Scottish result because it's just been so horrendous. I mean, this must be some, you know, it's all relative given the coverage that Labour have had over the last number of months, but this stuff over the last few days has just been so horrible, so toxic. Couldn't have come at a worse time for Labour. It was the day after the Labour manifesto launch that this all happened, and that horrible stairhead Rami between John
yeah.
Mann and
Oh,
Ken
it's
Livingstone. So I think it's bound to. I mean, certainly some of the Sunday Times poll, for example, today was before that, so it's not really very clear, but how it will impact. But I think it's bound to impact. So it may. I'm sceptical about the Tories beating Labour in Scotland. But if it does happen, then I think the events over the last few days will be what made the difference, if that's what actually transpires on Thursday. Because it's just been a dreadful advert for the Labour Party. And it's actually unfair on Kezia Dugdale, because she's if you like, a victim of all this.
Yeah.
Because, this is not happening within the Labour Party in Scotland.
No.
It's all coming from the Labour Party
Absolutely.
at Westminster. So she's got real cause to feel very badly let down by her own party, actually.
Indeed. But then she's been kind of reluctant to separate herself from the parties.
Well, that's part of the territory for a UK-wide party, of course.
Exactly. Sadiq Khan says that he expects it to have some impact on his campaign to become Mayor of London, so we need to wait and see. In terms of independence India F2, which is clearly at the forefront of many people's minds, and Nicola Sturgeon is vowing in the Sunday Herald that she's going to be leading the party to another independence referendum, hopefully within the next Parliament. So that would put it, before 2020?
2021.
2021. So, what do you think there is, I guess, how is the support for independence when you go around and say, do you think that fire that burned in 2014 is still burning?
I think so, yeah, and I actually think it's greater now than it was,
You
or
think?
the desire for independence is greater. I think, particularly with just, the Smith Commission, and really has Scotland really benefited from these greater powers massively? Day to day, do people notice kind of big difference? And I don't think there is, and I think that there's a lot of people that maybe thought, the vow and all that would help Scotland. I don't think it has helped Scotland, and I think really anyone who is maybe swithering about going yes or no, I think would be much more certain to go yes now, because they actually see that Devo Max or whatever the kind of option was, it's not really made much of a difference. So I think it's kind of proven that actually independence, if you want Scotland to have more powers, more say over itself as a country, actually independence is the only way to go now.
Is Brexit a trigger?
I think it could be. It's been the one example of, if there is Brexit and Scotland's taken out against its will, then that's been the one example of what would trigger another referendum. I don't think it's an ideal scenario for a couple of reasons. One, the timescale would be quite short, and it would be determined by something that had happened elsewhere, if you like, rather than feeling that the case is ready right now, to go for another referendum. So I think the timescale's out of your hands if you base it on Brexit. And secondly, I think the scenario is problematic because, of course, you're talking about Scotland becoming independent from the rest of the UK when the rest of the UK is leaving the European Union. So I think that would sort of throw up a number of cross-border problems, not insurmountable problems, but just sort of extra challenges in terms of making that yes case. My own view is that the sort of timescale and scenario for another independence referendum may well be when, rather than if, I think, when the Tories get re-elected at the next UK general election in 2020, because of course that will be, another 5 years of Tory government on top of 10 years at that point, already, when we've got one single Tory MP in Scotland over all these years. So I think from a democratic deficit point of view, then I think the kind of scenario that Nicola Sturgeon talked about of a big upsurge in support for independence, which would, in her view, trigger another referendum, would be on the back of that really sort of chronic democratic deficit situation of yet another 5 years of Tory government against the clear votes and wishes of the people of Scotland. So that could take you to a referendum, let's say in that period, 2020-21, the last year of this Scottish Parliament being elected on Thursday.
Indeed. I should still just about be alive then. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for
Have
that.
you been any fit state to vote?
It's debatable where I was in the last one. Anyway, moving away from politics. One of the other stories, big stories in the papers today, the BBC, and a suggestion that the BBC should not be taking part in competitions or ratings battles with its competitors in big numbers like Britain's Got Talent. BBC shouldn't put up any big show in competition with Britain's Got Talent because that's not its job, according to various politicians. Do you have any sympathy with that, Susan?
I mean, the BBC's kind of remit is obviously public service, and there's obviously the argument that, you know, as Strictly Come Dancing doing any kind of public service, but, you know, as Strictly Come Dancing, same with Bake Off, which is arguably the biggest TV programme going at the moment, you know, they've got to kind of get the balance between public service and programmes people want to watch. And, you know, I don't think there is really any need for programmes, you know, massive programmes to clash, because there's not enough good TV programmes on at the moment for really them need to
Line of Duty. Jeez.
But that's one. And,
Okay.
we were talking earlier, I mean, how many families, as they used to do years ago, sit down on a Saturday night and watch a big programme on the television? People consume their television and entertainment in such a different way now. I record everything so I don't have to see adverts.
You watch it when it suits you.
And I watch it when it suits
People
me.
make up their own channel
Yeah.
effectively by
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
mixing and matching from whatever they're particularly interested in. So,
That's because of the internet,
yeah.
which has ruined everything. Ruined lives, sacrificed our
he said
towns,
bitterly
our
as a-
countries, our industries
Music,
on the
yeah.
altar of
And start doing
convenience.
that music.
And music too. But anyway, that's just a personal view. But the thing about the BBC is it's damned if it does and damned if it doesn't. If it doesn't get those viewing figures, then it's criticised for not bringing in the sort of the audience figures, and therefore being a kind of niche thing where we're talking about, you know, documentaries and not big number shows. I think people do still watch television as families. I think it just needs to be good TV. Line of Duty, to go back to Line of Duty, which is my current obsession. People as a family, well, maybe not as a family, because really you're not going to have kids watching that, but people looked at that in their thousands when it was broadcast, and as well as catching up with it in iPlayer. So I think there is still a demand for that.
Yeah, there is. I think maybe one area where this report might have something is the very heavy advertising on the BBC. I mean, it annoys me a bit because it just takes so long to get from one programme to the next, but you're not supposed to have adverts on BBC, but it heavily advertises itself.
Yeah.
So I think that's possibly a little bit unfair in terms of unfair competition. So I think maybe to strip some of that out, some of these endless plugs that you get in between programmes, you know, there's maybe an argument that should be different in the future.
Or move it to a subscription model, and you buy the programmes that you want to watch when you want to watch them.
Maybe. I think you should be forced to watch some things because they're good for you.
That's the Ruthian sort of view that from Richard.
This programme is good in itself and you will
must
watch
watch
it.
We'll strap to this chair.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of it. As long as it's not being strapped to the chair and watching Britain's Got Talent, because that's...
Yeah, that would be
Nice
the
guy.
torture. Yeah.
Nice
that would be torture. Yeah.
I was to say, I think come to the end of our newspaper review.
Okay, well,
time to move on a little bit.
Susan is going to stay with us. Kevin is going to
Kevin,
leave us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now our next guest is Maureen McGonigal. Maureen is the chairman and chairperson and founder of Scottish Women in Sport. In news recently for criticising Royal Troon and for being a male-only organisation and suggesting that it should not, in fact, be hosting the Open. Maureen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello. Thank
Hi.
you. Hi.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your feelings about Royal Troon and why you think it's time for it to join the rest of us in the 21st century.
To be fair, the feelings are not really just about Royal Troon. They're about any institution that doesn't allow women to be part of it. So there is a bigger picture here. But I think in terms of Troon and being awarded the Open, I think it's wrong. It sends out the wrong messages. And I think it's time that we all stood together and made sure that we take equality forward in all forms. And sports in everyone's life, so it's a good place to start.
You golfer?
I was going to say, Hardeep Singh Kohli has written an interesting piece today about that and talking about the fact that men-only domains are just not appropriate. He asks, how can Royal Troon, a club that excludes members based solely on their gender, A, be allowed to exist, and B, be given the most prestigious of all golf championships to host? He says the fact that it's being played at a venue that openly discriminates against ladies, and that's a term as patronising as it is anachronistic.
Yeah. And it's a bit of an anomaly as well, because I think 100 yards away from Royal Troon is a ladies' golf club that doesn't allow men. So we have to fight the battle on both fronts.
Yeah.
You know,
You think that should not be allowed? There should not be women-only clubs or women-only swimming nights, for instance?
Well, I think that's different, but I think, people are not being debarred, they're making provision.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to say that Troon couldn't make provision for women if they were members. But I think if we're going to stand and shout out that men should let women in their clubs, we have to get the women to let men in their clubs as well. You've got to have that balance. It's just not right not to do that.
Susan, badminton is your sport. Is there a problem with equality in badminton?
No, there's not. And I mean, I think I actually don't have a problem with single-sex clubs. I have a massive problem with single-sex clubs like Muirfield, like Royal Troon, being awarded the Open. I think for me that's a far bigger issue than actual single-sex clubs, because I think that, you know, if the RNA have only recently allowed women to join, and, you know, are still awarding the Open to men-only clubs. What kind of signal does that send about the sport? You know, that just shows that golf really is just has sexism just ingrained through it, you know, and it's just almost like an innate kind of thing within golf. And, you know, if I had like a young kind of daughter, I wouldn't be sending her to play golf if that's the message they're sending. You know, that's the kind of forefront of golf, is they're awarding their biggest, most prestigious tournament to a men's only club. I wouldn't be encouraging a young girl to play the sport. So I think that, you know, single-sex clubs, just private members clubs, are a different thing. But I think if that's how they're going to really advertise their sport, it shouldn't be a men's only club, because it just sends the wrong signal just across the board. And, you know, golf has enough problems with getting women involved without having that as their most prestigious tournament going to a men's only club.
It seems to be some sports are worse than others. You're saying not an issue in badminton, but
I actually think in most
why do
minority
you think
sports,
a minority
yeah,
sport.
I think minority
okay.
sports is massively different, because you see
Yeah.
in football the huge disparity between the men's and women's games. You know, and that, I mean, there's many reasons for that. I think part of the reason is women's football has just not been going for as long. You know, so it's not had as much time to build up. So I think that's probably the main benefit that a lot of minority sports have, in that, you know, actually in minority sports, you know, when it's Olympic medals or Commonwealth medals, the funding, the people who provide the funding don't care where it's coming from, whether it's coming from a man or woman. If you can win a medal, that's all they care about. And I think that's the benefit of being involved in a minority sport, is there's actually not enough money, that there is a huge disparity between the sexes, whereas golf and football and rugby are really the kind of main, not problems, but the main sports where there is like challenges between equality. So I think, yeah, for me there was no sexism at all. And in fact, some of the men used to get annoyed that I got more funding than they did, but that was because if I was getting better results, then that's all actually they cared about. But I think I think actually in Scotland there is quite a lot of equality. If you take football out of the equation, I think there is, well, yeah, and golf, yeah.
And rugby.
And
I think
and
tradition in team sports, you know, are the problem where sexism is. You know, if you get a traditional sport, it's hard to break into. You'll find that women's football in Scotland, difficult to break in. But America, they make it big. They make it big because it's not their first sport. If you want to play American football in America as a woman, you then have an issue.
Yeah.
And I think tradition in terms of football and golf can also be the catalyst that stops the equality.
This golf thing is not new though, because I remember when people writing about it decades ago, and nothing's happened. Nothing has changed really. Or is that true? Has nothing changed?
Well, I have to agree with you. I think about maybe 15, 20 years ago, invited on to do a programme with, I'm trying to think of the sports writer's name at that point. He's long gone by now, and we were talking about golf at that point, and he said that in Edinburgh there was a sign outside a golf club that said no women or dogs allowed. No dogs or women, and actually women get second billing.
Right.
So, you know, it has been around for ages. But yes, Susan's quite right. The numbers are dropping dramatically. Over Great Britain and Ireland, 2006 they had 215,000. In 2016 they've got 158,000. So in terms of the economy of a sport, it makes sense to get women in, get disposable income, get them in and get them members, and you know, get their money in.
And pay them equally and award equal prize money, which is also an issue when you look at tennis, for argument's sake, and golf, I would imagine as well, and the difference in prize money
Tennis has
between men
been
and
in the
women.
news recently.
Yeah, I mean, well, Novak Djokovic, the world number one, came out with a comment saying he thought men should fight for more money because they are basically bringing in more audience, which I think is just, in some cases that's true, in some cases it's not true. You know, there's plenty of people who would much rather watch Serena Williams play than watch any of the men play. And you know, like I think particularly a sport like tennis, which and actually tennis is the one sport where women are closest to equality. And you know, they do get equal prize money at the Grand Slams. They do get, often Serena Williams will get as much coverage as, you know, the top men, but yet there's still a kind of feeling by the men that they should get paid more. And you know, there's often tennis the argument that men should get paid more because they play best of 5 sets. But I mean, for me, that's not really a fair argument, because I think, you know, Billie Jean King has been fighting for equal prize money in tennis for decades, and she said that actually it's not about the money, it's about the message. And I think that's completely true. You know, if you pay women less, then you're just really saying, well, they're not really worth the same. You know, they're kind of a lesser value than the men. And I think for me, that's actually a kind of more important thing, a more important message to send out by paying them equally, actually, than the kind of few $1,000s extra they get.
Scottish women's sport. What gave you the idea? Or did this come to you one night, or what?
I think it came over a couple of weeks, and it was just around the 2012 Olympics. And whilst I was aware of all the stats that were out there in terms of the inequality in investment and prize money and whatever, Claire Balding was taking up a spokesperson's role and coming out with these stats, and very powerful delivery. But the problem for me is that although it said UK, I didn't feel it was touching Scotland. And the story goes, and it's now out in the public, a glass of wine one night took me to this revelation. I was sitting in the house having a glass of wine, and I thought, you know, we don't have anything in Scotland that brings everyone together. Now, this is everyone that supports women getting equality in sport, men, women, physiotherapists, administrators, you name it. It's an organisation that I felt could bring everyone together in a strong, powerful voice. So it just went from there. I just downloaded a URL one night, created the name, and just took it from there, which is 2 years past in November.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you think has been the greatest successes since you started?
I think, in a nutshell, the fact that the organisation is now recognised and accepted, and it tends to be a go-to place. I get emails from people asking me all sort of weird and wonderful things. So I think the success has been that it's still here and it's established.
Yeah.
We have had a couple of really successful conferences. We've had a couple of awards dinner, and the awards dinners to celebrate women in sport, so they're great as well. We've got a campaign that we're currently running, getting women active at work. So there are many things that would be difficult to pick out one, and it's just been a joy.
Its aims seem to be manyfold. One, to encourage women to take part in sport, and I guess to try and minimise the competitive element in it, or is that fair? To try and just say, look, it's just fun, it's good for its own sake.
Women Active at Work is about that. It's about getting women to be active. You know, that women sometimes are turned off by the word sport, so they think they've got to go out and run faster than their friend or jump higher than their friend. You know, sport's all about competitive, but it's actually a means to getting fit and active and actually healthy and happy. So with Women Active at Work, we were trying to bring that down using the sports, because there's so many different benefits you get being part of a sport that you don't just get being active and going out walking. The camaraderie, the team, the support and everything. So it was bringing it down to that level and saying, it's not important, we're not asking you to be winners or run the next marathon, but just go out and have fun with your work colleague and do something that gets you a bit healthier.
Susan, as a sort of prominent Scottish sportswoman, when you heard about Scottish women's sport, did you think, alas, somebody's doing something, or was this something that struck a note with you?
Yeah, I mean, of course it's a great thing. I mean, the more girls and women doing sport in Scotland, and I think especially for me, I think girls, you know, I think for me is the most important thing, is getting more young kids, young female doing sport, because, you know, if you're a young girl and you do sport, you're far more likely to continue doing it, whereas, you know, so many girls drop out of sport at kind of teenage years, and that's a huge problem or a huge challenge. And if you can just keep girls, you know, just make sport more normal, or sport and activity, exactly as you say, it doesn't necessarily need to be sport. You know, if you can just keep girls more active and make them see the benefits, there's so many benefits of doing sport. And, you know, I don't think you need to be an elite athlete to see those benefits. And in a lot of ways, actually, being an elite athlete, you get all the bad bits of sport. You know, like there's a lot of things about being an elite athlete that are not good. Whereas if you do sport just at a kind of recreational level, you get all the benefits. You get the social benefits, the health benefits, the mental benefits. There's just so many things that are good about doing sport. And, for me, if you can get more young girls doing sport, kind of school age, then they're far more likely to continue that, when they get into adulthood. And that's just, there's so many good things about that.
Yeah. You've got a conference coming up in June.
Yes, we're going to look at education is the key to participation in sport. So again, I'm kind of looking forward to it. It's a good lineup because again, it's an important area, and there's perhaps not enough focus within the school environment for kids to get involved. So good people speaking, and supported again by RBS and SSE, which is great for us.
Yeah. Got a wee plug for the National to come as well. Since
Yes.
the National has been nominated for Be a Game Changer Award for its coverage of women in sport, which it's been a pioneer of, really.
Absolutely,
which has been good.
yeah.
That's a good thing for newspapers to cover women in sport, or is it?
Well, I mean, I think all the problems we're talking about, again, the lack of visibility in terms of women in sports, and Susan's own sport, Kirsty Gilmore's now through to the final. You pick all your papers. I think we could go through all those papers and maybe struggle to find that. I think if you've got, a 0.5, which is the number that's thrown out, coverage in the papers, you'll know, and that impacts on the money that comes into sport and what's paid out. But, we think that in terms of the conference, bringing people together to look at what's happening to get more activity in school. We've got the girl coming along, Elaine Wiley, coming along from the School Mile to talk about that success, and boy, is that a success, and it's not a difficult thing to do.
What is that?
What isn't it?
Sorry, the teacher from St Ninians in Stirling who won an award discovered that when she took the children out one day, they were puffed out before they went very far, and she thought, I'm going to get them fit. And so every day, every child in her school went out and they walked a mile. The teachers just decided as and when, and there's very few occasions where they don't do it. And this is
Every day.
every
A mile.
day.
Every day.
Every
They
day.
can walk.
That's a good idea to me.
That's exactly the problem. and loads of schools have copied them now. They
Absolutely.
found so many benefits from the kids. Their behaviour improved, their concentration improved,
That's right.
which I think just proves there's so many benefits to doing sport. And it wasn't a race. The kids could do it as fast or as slow as they want, and it just meant the kids, and they didn't even have to put their PE kit on. They just did it in their uniform.
and no special shoes. They just go out.
And it just, I think, shows that if you get kids in the habit of doing sport and activity, then they'll see so many benefits, and they're so much more likely to continue doing it.
Yeah, this has been rolled out to many schools in Scotland, and it's now been looked at as being rolled out into secondary schools. So, yeah.
Sounds
Great
good.
idea.
Sounds a
Great idea.
Indeed. And what happens next for women in sport, Scottish women in sport?
Oh, that always depends on funding, Richard.
Right.
It's a difficult organisation to fund because we don't deliver sport. There's a lot of good organisations out there delivering sport. I'm a director of Scottish Sports Future, a great wee organisation that uses sport to empower young people. But we think that there's a market for what we need to do to complement everything else that's out there. But I'll continue to carry on. I look forward to the challenge. We've got the conference. We're also going to be down at the awards looking at that. So it's all about raising the profile. And we have plans for some other bits and pieces to hopefully roll out this summer.
When I was a newspaper editor, I got a lot of stick, as every newspaper editor gets, for the sports section being male dominated. People would count the number of pictures and count the number of women pictures compared to the number of men pictures, and continually tell me what a terrible job I was doing because there was 2 women and 500 guys, and they were right. I don't know how I justified it, but I kind of tried to say, readers, football is the big driver. I mean, we all know what the huge driver is. The huge driver is the old well, it's not the Old Firm now, but the Celtic and Rangers. I know it's a terrible territory. I'm not going to go into that territory. But yeah, Celtic and Rangers, big drivers of audience. Football, a big driver of audience. Badminton,
Not a big driver.
No,
I mean, that is the...
How do you make that change?
But it's a chicken and an egg thing, though, isn't it? Because we moved up from Manchester in 1979, and my dad came to be sports editor at the Herald. And in 1979, he was pushing for more coverage of women's and minority sports, and nothing's changed.
I know. I mean, it is so
Nothing's
hard
changed.
because it is a kind of inescapable fact that the majority of people buy the sports or buy the paper. If they're going to do the sports section, they're buying it for the football.
Yeah.
So if you stop writing about football or stop writing about Celtic and Rangers,
It's not going to go well for
exactly, the sales figures will go down.
Yeah.
There's kind of no disguising that. But I think that you know, you flick through the paper and yeah, have the majority of football, that's fine, but I think there could be a better balance and there could be a better mixture of doing football, do that, the kind of bulk of the coverage on football, but then also include some other stuff, because there's so many kind of real, like, world-class athletes that Scotland has. I mean, Scotland's footballers are not world-class, you know, and that's, I think, what kind of annoys me. Yeah, there's very few Scottish footballers who would be in the top even 100 in the world in kind of terms of football, whereas there's so many elite athletes in other sports, and this is actually males and females. You know, I think that's an issue for all minority sports, not just female athletes. That, you know, it's
I just wondered if it's a leap of faith that's required. You know, there are some research out there, particularly around big tournaments like the Olympics and Commonwealth Games, when papers do put out a good mix of sports, and they also have, you know, the genders a bit more balanced. And there's good research to show that the spike in sales goes up, and then it goes down.
It's a hard thing, though, because the Commonwealth Games is you know, especially the Glasgow Commonwealth Games. There was people interested in the Commonwealth Games because it was in Glasgow and because it was a multi-sport event, and I mean, it's hard to say, would that continue if that, you know, that kind of coverage was kind of 12 months round? I'm not sure it would. I think there needs to be football coverage, because that is what most people are buying the papers for, but there could definitely be a better mixture.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on. Before we leave this subject, I think we need to say that voting for the Be a Game Changer Awards ends tonight.
12 o'clock.
People who are watching this can, if they're watching it on Sunday, still vote, and they can go to the website, which is www.womensporttrust.com/media-initiative-year-2016, I think is right.
You get a reward just for doing that.
Indeed. So, not that I'm encouraging you to vote for the national, but could you vote for the national, please? Thank you very much, Maureen.
You're welcome.
Susan,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're now going to look at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland's annual festival of new music called Plug. It's celebrating its 10th anniversary this coming week. It starts on Tuesday, which is May the 3rd, runs until Friday, May the 6th. Got some stats for you here. It features 104 musicians, 37 new works, 10 concerts and 1 opera. Ooh. The opera is filmed on the set of BBC programme River City, which is not where you would normally find well, I guess a soap opera. But it's called Uti, I think, and it's composed by student composer Henry McPherson. It tells the stories of three magicians and the silence where magic was once found, and it'll be screened at the opening concert of Plug on May the 3rd.
Sounds interesting. Sounds interesting indeed. And now for the music segment of the programme, we have with us today Marco Romelli. Marco is an award-winning guitarist and composer studying at the Conservatoire. I'll give you Marco. you, Marco. Thank you. So moving on to the final section of today's show, we're going to be talking to some list candidates. We have Suzanne McLaughlin from the SNP, we have Joanna Baxter from Labour, and Zara Kitson from the Greens. It's ironic that just last week we had a survey that showed that engagement in politics in Scotland is higher than it's ever been before. But at the same time, what we've got is an increase in abuse and sexism directed at our female candidates and politicians. All of the guests that we have here today have experienced some form of sexism or misogyny or abuse online and offline from members of other parties and from members of their own. So without naming and shaming and having a my party is worse or better than your party discussion, we're going to look at what's happening, try and find out why it's happening, and take a view perhaps on what needs to be done, how we can get involved and address it, stop happening. Zara, what do you think?
So yeah, I've had various experiences over the years. We were having a chat about this earlier, and in terms of the online stuff now, I think you get very good at getting your own mechanisms for dealing with it. So it's a kind of ignore, it's just trolls, and carry on. So I think in some ways when I was reflecting on it, I was like, am I actually a bit blind to it now? Because I've just become so used to kind of blocking it out. And I think that there's a danger in that, because then if we are all getting to, you almost, we're then not challenging it because it's tiring to challenge it all the time. So then you get into the situation where you're just ignoring and you're not actually dealing with the issue. So I think that, you know, some sort of common approach for us to have better tools to be able to deal with it jointly would be a good way to go. I've had particular experiences on the radio, which some people might know, when I was on Call K, and I got called by one of the male callers, you know, the wee lassie doesn't know what she's talking about. And then when I said, you know, I'd like to respond to that sexist comment, and then he said, oh, come on, darling. So it was quite comical, but it kind of exploded online, and then people were connecting back. But so there's everyday situations like that where, and I had a chat to other male colleagues who are even younger than me, and they haven't had that experience of that kind of belittling. And I think that happens a lot where it's you know, wished, or you don't really know this is the big boy stuff. And I think that it's that runs through a lot of our politics, and it's about how we find ways of dealing and challenging with that. And I'm sure people have had experiences as well about hustings panels, and sometimes and when I've been on husting panels in this election, it's only happened a couple of times where it's been all female panels, but it's a different experience.
Different in what way?
Different, I think that's just a bit more consensual, or people are in, you're not really, there's more of a sense of that camaraderie, because as women in politics we know that it's a challenge to get there in the first place, to even just be there.
Exactly.
So we're more interested in communicating our politics and our policies rather than jibing each other. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen at all, because of course it does, it's politics, but I think just the way that there's a different feel to it, and it doesn't get as personal, and I think that there is an angle that comes into our politics when it's a kind of male macho dominated, and I think that women just communicate in a different way. We're more interested in actually kind of communicating the ideas or the issues, rather than making it about a personal attack or trying to kind of look big yourself. And I think that happens a lot when you've got kind of big egos in politics. And
do women, you seem to suggest, women attract more trolling, online abuse?
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, why is the big question, Richard? I don't know. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But what I have come to realise is that if you are a woman who involves yourself in politics, you'll be treated a bit like a dirty joke. That's a simple response. And I was nodding my head away there when Zara was speaking, and Zara and I are in different parties competing essentially for the same votes, and I like her very much. We get on and we talk to each other, and we treat each other with respect, and we give each other a hug, and we speak. And the women, I can only reiterate what she's saying, the couple of women only hustings that I've done have been wonderful. You know, it has been a meeting of politics and minds and chatting, and some tough questions in there as well. But the male
ones, including, I call them manels, a lot of them. I've done a few of those where I've been the only women.
What?
Manels,
Manels.
all male panels. There's a lot of
That's
mansplaining. That's a new word I found. I heard quite recently, and that goes on a lot. And even the questions from the audience tend to be, it's a 20-minute rant where the questioner will tell you their opinions before asking, you know, yours. But in the same day last week, I was called too glamorous, too fat, stupid, a wee lassie, and too old on the same day. Who knew, you know? And I'm relatively new to this sort of party politics. Candice Zara's got more experience, so I'm maybe going the opposite way. I'm taking it all quite personal and getting quite hurt and angry and emotional about it all, and wanting to fight every battle and answer every question. Yeah, there are some points now already that I think I just won't bother saying that. And that's again the silencing of women's voices, because I know that I wake up in the morning to 150 notifications calling me all sorts of nasty names, and you know, a little bit of self-care, you know, has got to be brought in, but it is effective, and I'm sure Janice are going to have exactly the same experience. And again, I think it's really great what you said about, you know, no party, it is a male thing to attack women who put their head above the parapet in politics.
Joanna, what's your experience?
Yeah, so I had a recent experience where an activist in another party posted a meme about me on Facebook. I had an advert in the local newspaper for the election campaign, and it was on the front page for a couple of weeks. It was then on page 3. So the meme he posted, he doctored a picture of me, my Twitter profile picture, and he put words on the meme that said, "Yaldi, I'm on page 3, keeping my clothes on for fear of scaring away the remaining Labour voters." And I mean, I was just absolutely shocked by this. And this was an officer of this other party. I think Zara's right. You do get into a habit of, you know, managing your kind of online interactions so that, you know, there is an element of self-care, as has been said. So you mute, you block officer in the constituency I'm standing in. And I was just shocked that someone in a leadership position could think that that was okay to do that, and that was the main form of attack on me as a candidate standing in that constituency. So I just retweeted it, and you know, with no intention other than to highlight the fact that, you know, that's there and it's wrong, but it just turned into a media storm. And it just grew and grew. The interest in it, I was just really stunned by the number of people who find it so offensive and wanted to call it out. And one thing that I would say to both colleagues here, actually, the most heartening thing for me were members of the SNP and members of the Green Party who contacted me to say that he does not represent our party.
Because it's the same.
Nicola Sturgeon
Because I think every woman,
to do something.
Every woman in every party will have had some form of abuse from people in other parties. It's like, as you say, it's not even a guy thing. It's
it's
some
abusive.
Men.
It's privilege does not want to give up privilege. Is my opinion, and I liken it. And I've had discussions even with men in my own party, and one of the ways I was able to get through the message of their behaviour, and I don't mean that level of abusive behaviour, just casual sexism and, you know, the everyday stuff that you're so used to, you sometimes don't even react to, the pets and the darlings and the dolls and the wee babe and the wee lassie, you know, and your whole life would be a constant battle if you pulled up every single person. But you know, Nicola Sturgeon in the cabinet with her, you know, the gender cabinet and setting the lines and at our conferences, and we've made moves to make changes and really good changes, and been discussing to some men and some men on doorsteps who support other parties. You know, it's a whole wide thing, and what I've got it through is I likened it to during the referendum, and we were all there. Quite a few of us were, you know, chapping doors. And you would speak to some doors, you chap some doors in leafy, well-off sort of areas, and you'd be speaking very nice people, and they wouldn't believe there was poverty in Glasgow. They wouldn't believe that people. They were generally, really, dear, you know, like, you couldn't get this message through that because they hadn't experienced it, they almost didn't believe it exists. And there is still that genuinely quite nice men that you work alongside that think, oh, but it's not that bad, pet. You know, and I think it's definitely a power thing for me. It's they can't stand women taking away their privilege without even really realising what they're angry about.
How is you talked about I guess solidarity among women. How does that transcend party political barriers or structures?
I think in my recent experience it really did.
Right.
I mean, I was really heartened by the solidarity that was shown by people in other parties. But I just wanted to go back to the point that's just been made about power, because I absolutely think it's about power, and it's about denying women a voice. And the thing that made me really angry about what happened to me was that it meant that I ended up having a conversation with the media about what this person had posted, rather than the main issues in the constituency, like the possible privatisation of our ferry service. You know, it was almost like you're not allowed to talk about those issues. You know, this is a way to distract you. It's a way to pigeonhole you, and it's a way to say that, you know, we're the people who will talk about jobs and, you know, privatisation, CalMac, and you won't, darling.
Yeah.
You know,
just last
really
week,
bad.
Jenny Gunn, Rise candidate, said she'd been referred to everything from being a stupid little girl and an idiot to a slut, and comments about her attire. And her fear that she voiced in the Herald, I think it was that it would discourage young women, in particular the 16 and 17-year-olds who are going to be voting for the first time in an election. Zara, how do we engage with women, young women in particular, and bring them into politics when it's clearly on occasion a very nasty place to be?
We have to have support in place. I mean, all of our parties will have women's groups, and they're really important. And for me, it was the kind of women's network and Young Greens actually as well, because I was 25 when I joined the party, and having an entry into a party that means that you can connect with people in a supportive environment is really important. And I think that it is about us being connected across parties as well.
Absolutely.
As women, having a strong women's movement. I'm on the National Committee for Women for Independence alongside Suzanne and Michelle, and so it means that we can have a movement that transcends as well. And I've spoke at the Scottish Women's Convention recently, and I think that these kind of broad churches and movements that are about women and women's voices are really, really important. But the key thing is that I think a lot of it is just it's like, well, it's part of the process of becoming a politician. You just have to get the thick skin. And I think there's an issue in that, because, I mean, this is my 4th election now, and I'm much more used to what the kind of stuff that I can expect and to put up with. But that's been a big journey for me, and I'm a fairly confident person. I'm quite happy with myself. I'm fairly self-assured, and so I'm able to have that bit of resiliency. But I think that if you've not got that, or if you're having a bit of a normal human time of it, and you're not as resilient as you might be, and then you come up against this stuff, then it can knock you, and then you won't want to engage with politics again. And I think that that's all too often what we see, is that people might engage with politics, but it's for a short time, and then they think, actually, this isn't for me, because I feel downtrodden, I'm exhausted, I'm not feeling good about myself, because you're forced to constantly question yourself and who you are, and your self-belief. And I think that is a really tough environment, and not one that when young women are already probably having crises of confidence on many levels, just because of the wider societal structures, then who would want to put yourself forward into that? So I think that we've got to team up. I think that having women team up, so that we're actually working alongside each other and providing that support. And I think that we need better structure so it exists outside of politics as well, because the political thing can cause it. When you're in a political party, you're first and foremost representing your party and working on behalf of that aim. So then it can be more difficult to connect on aims that transcend other issues. So I think that having those kind of wider organisations is really important, and that we're investing in young women.
I think as well is calling out every single time you see it as older, you know, as an older woman in politics, you know, not one new young, and helping younger women who are coming in is absolutely. But there is nothing that makes my heart sink more than seeing a young woman in politics deny the sexism there because they've not experienced it yet, or denying the need for mechanisms to even the scale and equality measures. And when it comes from a young woman, my heart breaks a little bit inside, and I think I really don't want to bump into you in 20 years and you tell me you were right, I am now that woman. You know, and I think that's really difficult, because I think there's in school and in university, it is not as obvious. It's only obvious when you become you go on to have children maybe, or you become involved in politics, like Sarah has, or you go into a business where men are constantly promoted above you, that you start to see the stark realisation of, and it's no different in politics. I think it's just, especially in an election period, and especially now with the launch of social media, is that you know, every troll has a voice, and they use it, you know, on a daily basis, you know, and I think that is what we're experiencing as women in politics now, that maybe wasn't even there, I don't know, Zara, maybe 2-3 elections ago, maybe quite as bad. The online abuse, I find that
Well, I
the
was wondering
worst.
that, because this is your fourth. This is your fourth. Joanna, this is your first.
It is, yeah.
Indeed, this is your
Yes,
first as well. So I guess no social media. Pretty much when you had your first election, social media would be not the thing it is now.
No, it wasn't the thing. I mean, it was 2012. So
it was there.
Yeah, it was still. That was 2012. Standing for local council. It was my first election, and yeah, I mean, I think that was my first experience of engaging with having an online presence and kind of learning how to deal with attack generally, not just attack because I'm a woman, but just that kind of general political attack, because I wasn't party political before that, and so, you know, you kind of have to, you end up toughening your boots because you're forced to. And I think there's a wider point about changing the culture of politics and how we do it, because it is a man's game, and that causes problems not only for kind of women engaging, but just the general public to engage, because a lot of what goes on in politics is uninteresting to the majority of the population, because it doesn't
Twitter
connect.
spats, on the other hand, are really
Yeah,
fascinating.
Yeah. But you know, it doesn't. It's about how do we connect people in a way that actually connects to their lives. And I think it's interesting that the Gary Tank Commander interviews, as we were used to chat about earlier, has been one of the more interesting parts of this election campaign, because it enabled people to be human and to connect on a human level. And for me, that's a big part in actually how we progress a different kind of politics. And I think that's definitely what I've experienced when I'm in politics alongside other women, or in women's organisations that are political. It's just far more human.
Yeah.
And it's allowed to be. And I think that we need to allow for that in our politics, rather than a kind of, you know, it's all about a kind of very prescriptive, and you've got your script and your messaging, and you can't go from it. And then if you make a mistake, you're kind of down the drain, like what happened to Natalie Bennett, you know, from the Green Party of England and Wales, and she's still never been forgiven for that. She was up.
Is that the brain fog thing?
Yeah. So
everybody has that.
But, you know, I think the one thing as well is that we have to, well, I constantly, you know, in my own party as well, and the refrain is, Nicola didn't need all these mechanisms, and I'm sure we've all had, and not just using her, we all have met men and women who will point at the few exceptional women who get up there, and my line to that always is, you know, well, yes, she is absolutely exceptional. The women who make it are exceptional, because there is no place for mediocre women in politics. Seems to be plenty of room for some mediocre men, right enough, but there is no place for mediocre women in politics, because it would grind you down, and they are exceptional. But that to point at these exceptional women as if that's it, the battle is won.
But I think that makes a really important point, though, because there's an important role for male feminists in all of this, and supporting those mechanisms, because one of the difficulties that we've got is not just when women are standing for election, but actually having them apply for selection in the first place. I sit on the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, and we're constantly reviewing our procedures to try to ensure that, you know, we can get as many women coming through the ranks as possible. and dealing with any sort of sexism that they might experience along the way. But I mean, it kind of breaks my heart a little bit when you're looking at stats for selection processes and procedures, and it's right at the start where you see the number of women who are prepared to put themselves forward, just compared to the number of men who are prepared to put themselves forward, it's just so much more reduced.
So we've got the SNP, the Greens and Labour all have, they're all using quotas of some form. The Conservatives aren't. Is it working in your parties?
In terms of, I mean, for the Greens, in terms of us having gender balanced lists of candidates, yes, that's working. But there's still the issue there that Joanne's talking about in terms of getting women to actually come forward. And we were having a chat about this in the party and reflecting on what's going on. And it's not just in politics; it's in the world of work as well.
Absolutely.
Men they can look at a job and think, I could do that, and what I can't do, I'm confident enough to blag my way.
We're laughing with the knowledge of what you're saying. Yeah.
Women
I have no idea what you're saying.
Women who would probably be far more qualified than the men, but we would look at it and say, oh, I'm not quite sure I could do that bit of it, and be less confident.
Yeah.
And every time that I've stood for election, because I reflect on this myself as well, I've been asked. So I've never just thought and said, oh, I'm going to go for that seat, or I'm going to do that
Women
thing.
need to be asked.
And women need to be asked. And so I think it's everyone's job, and this is maybe a plea for all men in parties as well, and women. Don't just assume, but please do, if you see people that you think have got potential, ask them to go for it. And every time that I've ran as well, interestingly, it's always been a man that's asked me. It's not been a female colleague, and I find that interesting because I think there's something as well with women when we're forced into these positions of competition with each other, and it means that I don't know, but there's not the same boys' network and with women where you've got this kind of look after your own. So also I think it's about always taking another woman with you, and that's certainly my mantra now, and I'll always make sure that I'm, all of the mentoring and everything that I've had over the years from mainly men in my party, but also women, that I'm passing that on to other women.
I've missed all these warm and loving male networks. They bypassed me completely.
Down the golf club, you're not a golfer.
I can't do the trousers. If I don't want to make it all about men, but what could men do other than like wearing this
do
is
you know
what a feminist
one
looks
of
like
the
t-shirt.
real simple things for me, and I don't if you find the same issue as well, is it is quite often not a deliberate ploy between men. There are some of them who are, but it is quite often unintended. Like things like. Usually who wins the selection is the people who go along to most branch meetings or do the most active work, activists, and the branch meetings are 6 till 8 on a Monday night, which is homework time, brownies time, bath time. Women still do the majority of childcare, even though they're working all day, so you can't make the meeting, so you're not perceived to be the activist, so you're not chosen for selection, blah, 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 and on it goes. So what could men do? Any men that are politically active, not have the branch meetings, 6 till 8 on a Monday night, for example. It's that's just one, but constantly challenge yourself and look, are we getting an equal amount of men and women at this event meeting, and if not, why not?
And isn't it bad as well, and I'm sure it happens, after certain things, and even in Parliament Bar or other places, where if you're not in those spaces and places when that informal networking is happening, then you're often not part of some of the key decisions that are kind of this informal chat that often will prelude kind of decisions being made, and if you're not there, then you are missing out, and it isn't unsociable hours, it's not child friendly hours. I mean, I don't have kids, and it's probably why I've maybe managed to, because I'm often make sure I'm in those spaces and places because I'm able to, because I don't have additional caring responsibilities. If I did, maybe it'd be a different scenario.
Joanna, you wanted to?
Yeah, no, I was going to say a similar point actually. All of our parties, need to look at their procedures, and it's not just selection procedures, although they are very important, and certainly they've helped the Labour Party. We've got more women standing in this election than men, I think. I think it's 50.1% or something, but so we are. Well, it's better than every other party. So I'm really proud of that. But it is about those internal party structures, favouring people who are available after work, in the evenings, and trying to get people to be a bit more flexible with those procedures to ensure that you're appealing to a broad range of candidates. And that's not just about women, actually. That's also about involving the BME community, disabled community, to make sure that all of your events are as accessible as possible. So it is about, making sure that there are things on, a Saturday morning, on a Sunday, when people might be able to make it. Because if you can't get to all of those meetings, if you're not producing more leaflets than everybody else, if you're not making more phone calls than everybody else, then you won't get through. And it's about the length of the selection procedure as well. Actually, I often find that a lot of women speak to me to say that the length of selection procedures themselves put people off, because if you're being asked to run for a constituency selection and the selection procedure is 12 weeks long, and you have kids who are at school, then that's
Let's also talk about the financial aspect as well, absolutely, of running for selection. Now, women are traditionally the lowest earners in society as well, and we earn 79% of what men do, even at the top of the tree to the bottom. And women hold the lowest paid roles in society, unpaid roles, caring roles, all three of it. We all know this. Everyone sitting at this table, it is a big financial deal to stand for selection for a party, because if you have children, you have to pay for people to care. There's transport to travel to hustings, meetings, events. Someone else has to do your work if you have to take time off. And so once again, it's women and minorities who suffer. So there's and again, but it all boils back down to me, privilege and power. And funnily enough, when you were saying about the Conservative Party don't have the quotas, and we talked about this quite recently. A few of us, we were chatting at a hustings, and about it was a gentleman from another party. I'm not going to name and shame him, but he was saying, I'm not sure that it was the old meritocracy argument again. Are all those women there on merit? And I literally sighed. It's wearying when you have the same argument again, because of course, like, all the men are there on merit, absolutely, clearly, and he's saying, but why do we need positive discrimination? And again, and it's oft been said, but 19 male prime ministers from the same school, is that not a touch of positive discrimination in there somewhere? Maybe. And it was the shocked look on his face, it hadn't occurred, and I think that constantly the privilege and power and everything, and that comes down to, as you said, BME, women, people with disabilities. Zara and I were at an Enables hustings the other night, and increasing people who have disabilities into politics. It's power and privilege. And the simple fact of the matter is, if you're a white male heterosexual man, there is no better place to start, and I think if you are that person, you need to constantly question, what can I do?
Running into some time problems now, but I'm interested in your individual experiences of whether or not, how has it been like being a candidate? Maybe, sorry, you could talk. Has it been, well, you're a veteran now.
Well, I'm not sure about that.
What's it like for somebody that, what's it like just going through that process and being on the doorsteps? And
I mean, it's good. It's tiring at the same time, energising. I think that there is a lot of personal sacrifice, and I think that it does kind of want to pick back on Suzanne's point about money, because I mean, I was, and again as a young woman as well, I'm kind of 25 when I first stood for election for council, and have made decisions about my own career. I mean, I left, I was earning 30 grand a year, but I deprioritised that because I realised that actually, my fight in me was, I've got fire in my belly about Green Party politics, and that's what I wanted to do. We don't have any money as a party, so I've, had to make decisions along the way and work part-time, and have been living in poverty for the last couple of years. Finished up work 5 weeks ago so that I could run the election, so I'm now technically unemployed and I don't have any savings, and my mum still lives in the council house I grew up in. So you do have to make sacrifices along the way, and I'm hoping that they'll pay off and that I'll be elected on Thursday, but they might not, but for me, I think that if I don't get elected on Thursday, I have got some serious decisions to make about, I'm not sure if I can continue the way I have been with my politics because of personal reasons in terms of finances, thinking about starting a family. All of those things are coming into the play now, and I can't keep going on the way I have been. because I want to be able to actually like go out for a nice dinner now and again, and
Yeah.
you know, and look after
Selfish.
myself. So,
Yeah.
so I think that some of them,
Yeah.
there's kind of big challenges that come with being a candidate, where it is
Absolutely.
that if you're not the one that's going the extra mile, giving it your all, then you're always lagging behind or seen as that kind of mediocre person. And I've not been. I've given it my all, but it gets to a point when can you continue? You know, like that. So,
Joanna, how's it been for you? You had a bit of a mishap at the early stage of your campaign.
I did. Well, listen, I being a candidate, I've been a party activist for 20 years, and I've never stood before. And I'm standing in my home constituency where I was born and brought up, and it's been such an incredible honour, actually. Talking to the people that I grew up with about, you know, what's important to them and asking them for their vote, and they've been incredibly generous with it. But yes, on the 2nd of April, I slipped whilst going down my drive, and my foot slid from underneath me, and I landed on my full weight on my ankle, broke my ankle, cracked my fibula, and have been in plaster for the entirety of the election campaign.
You're standing with some
So
difficulty.
I'm hobbling along the streets of Cunningham North, and which has been interesting when I've been on the ferry back and forth to Arran. But I mean, you know, it's given me some challenges, shall we say. I was out on the doors yesterday with some volunteers. We were out for about 12 hours, and at the end of the day, one of my friends said, my feet are killing me. And I sort of looked at her, and I was like, I've been carrying my whole weight on my hands all day on my crutches. So it has been a challenge, but listen, people have been incredibly generous. My next door neighbours have been basically delivering me meals every night, and when I see people on the doorstep, the one thing they say is, well, that's determination for you. So they've been very kind.
Has it been much as you thought? Any surprises thrown in there?
I think it's probably been a little bit easier for me in some ways, because there was a warm glow around me, certainly on the Yeser side, because I am the owner of Yes Bar. So even people from the parties, the Green parties, and from Rise, even I have friends in each of them, and people I've come to know and respect, and a lot of respect. But also, I suppose, because I've been an active, shouty feminist for a long time, and being, as Zara mentioned earlier, on the board of Women for India alongside women like Michelle and Jean Freeman, Carolyn Leckie, Kathleen Kasky, incredibly strong women that have taken me into their arms and their fold, and, you know, pat you in the back and are there for each other. But equally in my party, you know, Nicola Sturgeon's been really personally supportive to me and is there, you know, pushing me on. And I was at a business brunch with her the day before yesterday, and she was like, you can do it, and you're always listening, talking, and it's been, you know, an honour and a privilege, and you know, I'm a bit fond of picking up the phone to Jean Freeman and going, you know, she's so awesome. She's there though, and constantly supporting you. So I'm lucky I have that and it's feminism that's brought me that there. Feminism is what's getting me through this. Sisterhood is what's getting me through this, and it is why I will not stop, even with the challenges, because my daughters, Zara, the daughter Zara goes on to have, you know, anybody, they will not. I do not want them to have to go through these challenges and these name callings and the slurs and the, you know, no, it's exciting.
That's why you do it, and you know, because sometimes you have these moments where you're like, why am I doing this? But it is because of that, because I think, well, I'm doing it for the women that went before me, the people that will come after, and all the other, you know, people that are in some way disadvantaged or underprivileged, or, you know, it's that kind of personal motivation that you think, well, I am in this position that I'm in many ways very privileged and far more privileged than many, because I'm able to articulate myself and stand and do this, so actually I've got a duty to do it, and then that's what kind of
I think
pulls you back.
Actually, the one thing that unites us all is that we do feel that we've got a duty because of the beliefs that we have, and you know, and we disagree on policies, but we're driven by a belief that, you know, we can fight for a better future for our country, for our children, and that's why we're involved in politics, and you know, and it's exciting to have that political debate.
We're standing on the shoulders of giants, you know, you know, and when you do feel really bad, and I go away, and you know, And it was quite funny. I was speaking to my husband, and he said, "But you know, it's awful, it's hard, it's terrible. You know, but you're not Emily Wilding Davison, and you're not Rosa Parks. You know, like, you know, get up and got someone shouted at you on Twitter. You know, stop, get over it. You know, joking. You know." And I say that to myself. I'm like, right, okay, bang. You know, you were standing on the shoulders of giants, and you need to think. You know, it is not that. You know, I'm not being force fed. I am not. You know, it is a little bit of Twitter abuse, and horrible as personal as it is. And I have to say, you know, reaching out to women in the other parties, you know, Catboy Zara and I had a coffee the other week and all kind of like patted each other on the back and said, keep going, keep going. And, you know, you can't disagree in politics, and that's what's so lovely about the women's meetings and women hustings and when more women are in politics, because it becomes about the policy rather than the person.
Well, we're going to have to call it there, I'm afraid. I have really enjoyed listening to you today and hearing your experiences. I hope you've enjoyed it too. I hope you at home watching have enjoyed it. We welcome your feedback. Please tweet us using the hashtag FullScottish.
Yeah, be good to know what you think.
Yeah, and who you want us to talk to next.
Indeed. We've got 4 shows under our belt now, so it would be nice to sort of find out what you think, how the show's developing. As Michelle says, get some ideas, because there's lots of things, lots of topics for us to look at. The election's way over, so we've got, you know, I guess, a broader scope after the election, I think. So yeah, got lots of exciting plans. It'd be nice to know what you think and what you think we should be doing.
Well, thank you very much for watching. Playing us out now, we have Marco. Thanks again, and thank you, Joanna, Zara, and Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Marco. Just to say, Marco's first piece was part of the Plug Festival. This second piece is not. It's just one of his own favourites. Marco.